Hi, and welcome back to Heimler's History. Now, we've been going through Unit 8 of AP World History, and one of the major themes of this unit is the decolonization that occurred all throughout the world after 1900. Now, in the last video, we saw some examples of some of these countries who gained their independence. There, we focused on how they actually won their independence, but in this video, we're going to look at what happened to some of these states once they actually became newly independent. So if you're ready, I'm ready, let's get to it. So we'll break this topic down into three sections. First, we're going to look at how the states of Israel, Cambodia, and Pakistan handled their independence. Second, we'll look at how governments took a strong role in the economics of these new states. And third, we'll briefly talk about migration in these new states. Okay, first, the new states themselves, and we'll begin with considering Israel. From as early as 1897, Jews argued for a separate Jewish state in Israel, and they wanted it in Palestine because it was their ancestral home. But there was a problem. By this point, Israel was the home to a huge population of Arab Muslims. Now, after World War I, Israel was made a protectorate of Britain, and Britain was all for the Jews. And so, with this newfound favor, Jews began to migrate to Palestine from Europe and the Middle East. And this influx of Jews began to pinch the Muslims living there, and they thought that their way of life was becoming threatened, and thus they started enacting opposition towards this Jewish immigration. However, after World War II ended and news of the Holocaust got out, there was worldwide sympathy for the Jews, and their cause for a homeland also gained sympathy right along with them. And this led to even more Jewish immigration to Palestine, which led to even more opposition from the Muslims already living there. And so as a result of all this, the United Nations brokered a deal in 1948 to partition Israel into Jewish and Arab sections. The Jewish section was the new state of Israel, and it was thought that this partition would work much like the partition of India into Muslim and Hindu states. However, war immediately broke out between the two peoples. The United States backed the Jews, and the neighboring Arab nations backed the Palestinians. Now, Israel ended up winning this conflict, and a ceasefire was enacted. But if you know anything about this area of the world, you know that violence continued after that period, and the tension remains between these two people to this day. Okay, next let's consider the nation of Cambodia. Cambodia gained its independence from France in 1953. After the Vietnam War, in which Cambodia participated, a communist organization called the Khmer Rouge overthrew the government and established communism in Cambodia. The organization was led by a guy named Pol Pot, who was a ruthless dictator, and under his leadership, over 2 million Cambodians were either slaughtered or died of starvation because of widespread famine. Because of this, there was a growing discontent with Pol Pot's leadership, and there was a growing movement to depose him. And in 1978, Vietnam invaded Cambodia to support those who wanted to overthrow Pol Pot. It was successful in the overthrow department, but the Vietnamese decided to stick around and occupy Cambodia. Now, the people were none too happy about this, but eventually, which is to say by 1989, the Vietnamese left Cambodia, and in 1991, the Cambodians participated in the first free elections in their newly democratic government. Okay, that was Cambodia. Now let's look at India and Pakistan. As I already mentioned, India won its independence in 1947 from the British, and part of that independence included a partition of India into a Pakistan for Muslims and an India for Hindus. Now, once the ink was dry on this arrangement, it created the occasion for huge waves of immigration. You had Muslims going up to Pakistan and Hindus coming down into India. And with all this great turmoil of migration, there was violence that broke out along religious lines that ended up in the deaths of about 500,000 to 1 million people. Now, once India and Pakistan were separated, they had their governments to think about. India established itself as a democracy. Pakistan, on the other hand, elected authoritarian leaders. And there was a persistent conflict between these two states, and that conflict centered on the region of Kashmir. So in 1947, the Kashmir population was mostly Muslim. However, the leader of the region was Hindu, so both groups felt they had claims on this little slice of the nation. Now, neighboring states have always fought over border territory, but this conflict became extraordinarily tense when both countries developed nuclear weaponry. They never did nuke each other, but eventually India, Pakistan, and China all claimed different portions of the region. Okay, now let's move to the second section, and this one's all about how governments took a strong role in the economic development of these new nations. And example number one, Sri Lanka. There, Sirimavo Bandaranaike became the world's first female prime minister, and by 1965, the Sri Lankan economy was struggling, and she instituted socialist policies like land redistribution, the nationalization of industries, and the restrictions on free trade enterprise. Now, these measures happen to be very unsuccessful in shoring up the Sri Lankan economy, but it is a good example of a government getting involved in its economy. Example number two, India. In the 1960s and 70s, the Indian prime minister was a woman named Indira Gandhi. No relation. And under her leadership, India was experiencing rampant inflation and growing poverty, all of which seriously threatened the Indian economy. And so Indira Gandhi took a heavy-handed approach to fixing it. She had a 20-point plan which included the jailing of her opposition, the reformation of corrupt laws, an increase in national production, and the alleviation of inflation. Now, this kind of government intervention was more successful here than it was in Sri Lanka, but apparently it wasn't successful enough to get Gandhi re-elected in 1977. Example number 3, Tanzania. This African country country gained its independence in 1961, and its first president was Julius Nyerere. Like other places I've mentioned, he enacted socialist policies such as a cooperative agricultural program. He also strove to make Tanzania less reliant on foreign aid, but ultimately these policies were unsuccessful to bolster the Tanzanian economy. Okay, finally, let's take a quick look at migration in these newly formed states. And I'm talking about a very specific kind of migration here. So when these states became independent, many people in them moved to the metropoles. Now, a metropole is the home territory of a colonial power. So refugees and immigrants from former British colonies like India and Bangladesh moved to England after World War II. Significant numbers of Vietnamese and Algerians moved to France, and Filipinos migrated to the United States. And the reason why this is significant is because it allowed the metropoles and their former colonies to maintain strong cultural and economic ties. Alright, that's what you need to know about Unit 8, Topic 6 of AP World History. Now, I am not a powerful enough dictator to nationalize my review materials, so if you need help getting an A in your class and a 5 on your exam in May, then you have to make a free choice and click right here and review packet. And if you want to join the Heimler family and give me the signal that you want me to keep making these videos, then subscribe and all your dreams will come true. Heimler out.